All right. Okay. So let's just finish up some of the slides that we've got left over from our class today. I wanted to still give you the opportunity to sort of practice some of this stuff on your own time. So I'm going to keep the same setup, and then I'll ask you to do any questions that are I was going to do in class. On your own time, and then maybe just write down your answer, and sort of I'll obviously always tell you the right answer. Okay, so the thing that we want to talk about next is advanced spreadsheet addressing. So how do we multiply the same column? Sorry, how do we multiply one column by the same number? Okay, so let's go to a new sheet so we can practice this together. We'll get rid of our hello world stuff. I'll just pick some random numbers. Let's say this is the price before tax. So I want to go 100, 150, 67, 39, 45. Okay, so I've got some prices here that exist before tax. So and some other place, I want to say the provincial tax rate is 0.05. And the federal tax is 0.07. So 7% of whatever purchase amount it is, it's going to be it's going to be federal, and 5% is going to be provincial. So here's how we do that. So let's say I want to say total tax. Okay, so we're gonna do a total tax amount here. So we can figure out what the total tax is, and then here will be a total amount. So I'll show you how to combine these three things together. So we have our price before tax. To calculate the tax, we take the total amount, we click on our number, we now have A2, and then we want to multiply it by the federal tax. And then I'll just add some brackets around this so that it's easy for us to understand what's going on. So I've got A2 times B11. That'll give me 5% of $100, which is $5. But I also want to add to it the federal tax, which is 7%. So I'm going to again multiply the price before tax by our federal tax amount. And I would expect that the total amount will be, oops, I somehow missed. I somehow missed the first one, so we'll do that again. A2 times B11, close bracket. So this will give me a total of $12. That makes sense. If I have $100, if my item is $100 and my tax is 5% plus 7%, a total of 12%, then when I multiply 12% by it, I should get $12. So, of course, you would want to now apply the typical trick of dragging this down or double-clicking it in order to compute it. But you'll notice that things don't actually happen as you would expect, right? So if I want the same formula to be applied, well, why is the tax less on $150 item? Why is it only $10.50? And for the other three, why is the tax 0? Well, whenever you see something like this, it's best to troubleshoot by clicking on the cell and then seeing what's going on in the formula. So here, now I'm multiplying this number A4 by B13 and B14. Why is that? Well, let's think about it. So this one does this, and then when we go to the next cell, it just keeps going, right? It goes A12 and 13. We go to the next one, A13, A14, or B13, B14, B14, B15, and B16, B15, B16. So that's not what we want. We always want to multiply that amount by the same provincial and the same federal tax. Well, enter this symbol, the $ symbol. That is what lets us select. The how to fix the address in an absolute way. Okay, so when you want to select an absolute address, you double click on the formula, and then wherever you want to fix the absolute address, you add a $ to both the cell column as well as the cell row. So now I've added a $ to B and a $ to 11. That will make sure that when I apply my formula to cells underneath, it will apply it correctly. So I add $1 to B and $1 to 12. That makes this federal tax fixed, and this makes this provincial tax fixed. I hit enter, and now when I drag my formula down, now it's got the correct formula. My tax for a $150 item is higher than my tax for a $100 item, and it's lower for a $67 item. Okay, that all makes sense. And then when we want to aggregate all this together, we then can simply add the two columns together. So we have 100 plus the total tax. The total amount is $112. So then when we drag this out, we will get the total number, the total for all these amounts. So let's say we want to get now the total for all of these amounts combined. Well, we can just do a sum as we did before. Select the cells that we want, and then hit enter. So now the total amount of all the cells is $449.12. Great, so now we've learned how to do advanced spreadsheet addressing, where we can fix the cell that we're referencing. You can see how this would be very useful when you're trying to come up with simulations and reporting sheets on your Excel sheet. You can have a single sheet where you have all the things that, all the variables that you want to usually have fixed, but allows people to control. So let's say this is something that's true in BC, but we want to see what happens when we try to go to another province where perhaps the provincial tax is higher. Let's say it's the provincial tax is 0.07. Well, we don't want to create a whole new sheet just for this little change and do all that work again. All we have to do now, because everything is referenced correctly, is change the provincial tax to 0.07. And as soon as you do that, keep an eye on this number, and all these numbers. All of these numbers are going to change based on this referenced value. Okay. So I hope you can see how valuable this is for any of the analysis or the reporting that you do in any context. All right, so that's advanced spreadsheet addressing. I've got another question here for you. Cell A1 contains the following. Okay, well, maybe I don't have a clicker question for you. So let's just leave this. Cell A1 contains the following: B2 plus D4. What is the formula if the cell is copied to D3? Okay, so what I want you to do is set it up on your computer. We'll create a new sheet. Cell A contains the formula. Just set this up here. Cell A1 contains the formula $$ $B2 plus D $4. What is the formula if the cell is copied to D3? Okay, so we'll put that in. Currently there's nothing in there. So I'm going to copy this formula and go to D3 and then paste it. Let's see what the formula becomes. Well, we fixed B, but we didn't fix the row. So now our formula is B4 plus G4. So the correct answer in this case is the fourth option there. All right, good. Let's talk a little bit about aggregate functions. So aggregate functions allow you to apply formulas to a range of values. So one example could be, let's say you want to take the minimum or the maximum or the sum, as we saw in the total column. We want to apply our formula to a whole column or a whole range of columns. Okay, so let's do that. Let's now see if we can figure out the maximum value of the volume. Which one of these is the maximum, right? So obviously Apple, you can quickly see there's only 12 rows here, but if you had, imagine, thousands or hundreds of thousands, how would you figure out what row had the maximum? You're not going to go look through all of them. You could sort it, but that's kind of not really what sorting is supposed to be, right? You can't sort every time you want to find new information. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on a new cell. We're going to use the equal sign. We're going to go type the formula max. And remember, as soon as you open the bracket, you have this nice little drop down here that tells you when you click on max, you'll get some help on how to actually use the max function. There'll be some syntax help, some examples on how you can actually use the max function, and that's all useful. Okay. So we've got max. We're going to select all of these, and then we're going to close our bracket and hit enter. And lo and behold, it tells us that our maximum is 100. So we bought apples. We sold 100 apples, and that's the maximum amount in terms of unit values that we sold. All right. So there we go. We just did an example of how to do max. And so remember, this colon is important. So here, so this colon is going to tell us that this is how, this is the range. So it goes from D2 to D12, and that means all of the rows from D2 to D12. This colon is that's what that colon means. Okay, so that's an aggregate function for you. Question: create aggregate functions to match the ones below. So we did this example earlier today where we had profit. So we had a revenue column and a profit column, and so this task is asking you to create those exact functions to match what's going on there. Okay. All right. So another question for you is: assume the cells in the range A1 to C4 each contain a number that is equal to their row number. For example, B3 contains 3, B4 contains 4, C1 equals. How many of the following statements are true? Well, the number of cells in the range is 12, the value of sum is 20, the value of COUNTIF is 4. So COUNTIF is a special function in Excel that counts how many values within this range are bigger than 2. Okay? And then an average and a maximum. So I want you to try this at home by yourself. And I can do this for you pretty quickly, but you can also do it. So I want you to have practice using some of these functions. So if you want to check your answer, post on Piazza, and then hopefully one of the other students will help you confirm your answer. And then, if there's any disagreements or controversies, I'll be happy to step in and try and resolve them. Okay, so we just had that question right now. Another question for you is: assume 3 cells in A1 to C1 contain numbers. Which of the following output is always the largest? So this is an interesting question because it asks you to think about some numbers that aren't actually you're not talking about real numbers, you're thinking about it in terms of an abstract thing. So if we do max A1 to C1, you're going to get a number. If you do minimum A1 to C1, you're going to get a number. If you do count, you're going to get a number that corresponds to the number of entries there are between A1 and C1. So that's going to be 3, right? Because A1, B1, C1. Then you can also do a sum of A1 to C1. So the question is, which of the formula outputs is always largest? So this is a tricky question. I personally think that the answer is this one. None of the above are guaranteed to be the largest. And the reason I think that is because of negative numbers. If I take the numbers -5, 3, 2, and then this is my set that I'm going to try testing it with. So here the maximum is going to be 3. The minimum is going to be -5. The count is going to be 3, and the sum is going to be 0. But let's say I take a completely different set where there are 2 negative numbers, -2, -1, and 5. So now when I do my max, it's going to be 5. If I do my min, it's going to be -2. If I do my count, it's going to be 3 again. And if I do a sum, it's going to be a +2. So in some cases, max is going to be the one that's going to be going to be highest, and in other cases it could be count, it could be sum. So none of the above are always guaranteed to be the largest. So I would say this is my answer for this particular question. Good. So other formatting things I want to talk to you about is the column width. So if I click and drag, I can change the width of this. But let's say you don't want to click and drag everything. There's a couple ways you can do. If you click this format button here, you can adjust the default width. So currently it's set to 8. Let's say I set it to 60. Now I'm going to have really wide columns. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to set the width to be 10. That's going to be reasonable for my particular project, and so that's how you do it. Another way to do it is to select all of the columns and then just double click, and see that will automatically fit each column to be the widest that its cells contain. So that's a useful thing of how to set the column widths. All right, so next thing is about conditions and decisions. So let's say you want to color code your spreadsheet so that any number that's over 50 shows up as green in the volume button. Well, what we're going to use is some conditions, and I'll show you how to actually get those to work, those conditions. So in this conditional formatting page, we're going to click this conditional formatting button. We're going to create highlight cells, and then there are certain rules that we can do: greater than, less than, between, equal to. If you have a text that contains a particular string, you can do that, a date, or duplicate values. Let's do greater than, because we said we want it to show up anytime the number of orders is over 50. So we click greater than. We get this nice box that asks us some questions. So our first question is, format only cells that contain the cell value to be greater than 50. Okay, so you'll notice here there's a button that actually lets you reference that threshold from somewhere in here. So we're actually going to try that. We're going to click this button, and then we're going to click this cell here, G. Actually, we'll do A20 so that it's easier to find. A20 is going to be where our threshold is going to be. So we're now going to color all cells that have a value greater than or equal to this value A20. Currently it's going to be 0 because there's nothing there. So I expect everything to be red. Good. So we've now got everything to be red. I go into A20. I set the threshold to be 50, and boom, it's going to automatically conditionally format that particular column to only highlight the cells that are over 50. Okay, so you can set this threshold to be 60, possibly even 90, and that way only one of them will actually be lit up. Okay, so that is conditional formatting. You can do all sorts of other things with conditional formatting, including styling the text. So it's bold, it's a different font, it's a different size. All those are possibilities, but you get the idea of how conditional formatting works. It's extremely powerful, and this is why a lot of people use Excel, so that they can send around these reports. These reports will automatically keep updating when you provided the right data, because the formulas are already set in the reports. Okay, great. So there's this functionality called the Format Painter that lets you apply the same formatting rule to multiple columns. You might find that useful for other contexts you see. It doesn't quite make sense here, so I'm not going to do it. Okay, so this is an exercise for you to try. Format the rows so that the rows are bold or green if the volume is over 50, and italics and red if the volume is over 10, and yellow background otherwise. So this is an example of what we're talking about here. This is what I want you to try and reproduce on your own side using conditional formatting. That's what we just did right now. And then take the previous formatting and apply it to the whole row. That lets you color code not just individual cells. So if I take this and then I use the formula painter to apply it everywhere, then it's going to highlight my entire row. Okay, so that's good, that's useful, and I expect that you might be using some of this stuff. We talked a lot about dates and how to like an annoying thing about dates, but actually, if you actually do need to use dates, it turns out that Excel has a very nice interface on how to actually choose your date format if you're already working in dates. So if you click on more number formats, you'll get a dialog box that looks like this, where you can specify how you want your date to show up. So let's say I want it to be day, month, year, rather than just day and month. If I click OK, now my date is going to be reformatted to include the year. So this is quite handy. I find it useful when I'm working with dates to use Excel to format them in a particular way. So I encourage you to explore that functionality of date and time in Excel. Okay, so that brings us to an end of what I wanted to share with you this week. Spreadsheets are general purpose tools for data analysis that consist of a table of cells that contain data and formulas. Formula contain data values, cell references, and functions, and conditions are used for making decisions with if and or conditional formatting. Okay, that is the end. Today we talked about what a spreadsheet is. We'll just go through and sort of check off all the ones we discussed. So we talked about what a spreadsheet is. We explained how cells are addressed in a spreadsheet. So for instance, the latest example was A20. So we talked about how to select cells in a spreadsheet. We talked about formulas, functions, and arguments, and concatenation of strings. We used concatenate, and I want you to use the word lookup and the index on your own time. Again, as I said, if you click the formula builder, you'll be able to get lots of help about how that formula works. So if you do lookup, you should be able to get some help on lookup and some examples on how to actually use this particular formula. Explain the difference between absolute and relative address. This is what we talked about with the taxes, so that's useful. And then explain how an aggregate function works. An aggregate function is like max, min, sum, mean, average, median, things like that. Evaluate and create conditions. Use if to make decisions. And then also how to use conditional formatting and be able to apply date and type formats. Okay, so that's perfect. So that's what we learned today, and that is what I expect most of your lab will be about next week, practicing some of these things and trying it on a real data analysis or data analytics project. Hope you have a good week, everybody. I'll have some more details about next week's lab very soon. So stay tuned, and yeah, we'll talk soon. Bye.